Likes Math. Today we're going to learn how to complete the square. The opportune time to complete the square is when your leading coefficient, the number in front of your x squared, is a 1, and the b term, or your second term here, the number in front of your x, is an even number. So in this case, this is a perfect example of when I would want to use completing the square to solve this quadratic equation. I know it's a quadratic because the x term, the highest power of the x term, is a squared. So my first step when I complete the square is to take the constant term and bring it over to the other side of the equation. So we're going to bring the constant to the other side of the equals sign. And how do we do that? Well, if you watched any of my other videos, you know we always use the inverse operation. Since this is a minus 16, the way we move it over is we do plus 16 to both sides. So I'm going to do a plus 16, and a plus 16. And that gives me x squared plus 6x equals 16. Step 2 is to take half of your b term, the number in front of your x, take half of b. So my b is equal to positive 6. Remember, this is a here, would be 1. B is positive 6. C is negative 16. Those are the coefficients in front of your variables. So the b is a positive 6, so I'm going to take half of b. So half of b is a positive 3. Step 3 is to square half of b. So the half of b was a positive 3, so if I square 3, I get 9. 3 squared, 3 times 3 is 9. Step 4 is add that number, which is the half of b squared, to both sides. So right now I have x squared plus 6x equals 16. Step 4 tells me to add that half of b squared, which is my 9, to both sides. So I'm going to say plus 9 plus 9. Step 5 is now to factor the left side and simplify the right side. Now, the shortcut to factoring the left side, and the reason we wrote out step number 2 here, is when we took half of b, which was positive 3, what this is going to factor into is always x plus, or this is a minus, whatever sign that is, whatever that value is there, squared. So you don't even actually have to think through the factoring for that. Just refer to step number 2. That tells you which number to put here when you're doing your factoring. So this value right here is the number that's going to go right there. And it's going to factor into x plus this number, or if that was a negative, it would be minus that number, squared. And if we simplify this side, 16 plus 9 is 25. So we end up with x plus 3 quantity squared equals 25. All right, we're going to move our steps up here. So now what do? Now I take the square root of both sides. So I'm going to put step 6 up here. Square root both sides. And don't forget the plus or minus on the right. So if I take, right now I have x plus 3 squared equals 25. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. Square root, square root. So if I take the square root of a squared, those are inverses of each other, so they undo each other. So this crosses that off, and all I'm left with is x plus 3. The square root of 25 is plus or minus 5. That's where I said don't forget the plus or minus. When you take the square root, you have to put a plus or minus. Remember, this is a quadratic equation, and we're expected to get 2 answers. Now, step 7, solve. So to solve, we're going to subtract 3 from both sides, using our inverse. So we have x equals negative 3 plus or minus 5. That breaks down into 2 separate equations. X equals negative 3 plus 5, and x equals negative 3 minus 5. Negative 3 plus 5 is equal to 2. And negative 3 minus 5, anytime I have a minus with a negative, negative 3 minus 5, I use switch change, which means I'm going to change this minus into a plus, and this guy to his opposite sign to make adding with negative numbers, or subtracting with negative and positive numbers easier. So I have a negative 3 plus a negative 5, so that is a negative 8. So my 2 answers are x equals 2 and x equals negative 8. And those are your steps for completing the square. We'll review them quickly. Step 1 was we subtracted that constant, or added it to the other side of the equation. Step 2 was we took half of the middle term. In this case it was 6, took half of that, and that's a positive 3. If this had been a negative 6, we would have had a negative 3 here. So make sure you carry the sign along. Then we square whatever that number is that we got half of b. So positive 3 squared is 9. This should always end up being a positive number, because when I square, whether it's positive or negative here, squaring always gives me back a positive number. Step 4, add that number from step 3 to both sides of the equation. Step 5, factor the left-hand side. And remember, it's always going to factor into x plus this number, minus this number, whatever is here from step 2 with a square equals, you're going to add those 2 values together. Step 6, you're going to take the square root of both sides. Square rooting a square undoes it, just gives you the insides. Taking the square root of 25, don't forget to put your plus or minus in front. Subtracting 3, just stick that negative 3 right in front of that plus or minus 5 to make 2 equations, a negative 3 plus 5 and a negative 3 minus 5. Solve each of those mini math problems and you have your 2 answers. And I look forward to seeing you at future Apex Math videos. Thank you.